Welcome everybody. Thank you for your attendance this afternoon. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, so we have apologies today from Rebecca Harrison, Clive Sentence and Paul Gillett.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And then from officers and councillors, we've got apologies from Andrew Felton, Chris Bard, Hermina Sherwood, Neil Butler and Councillor Jeff Morgan.
Okay, I thought I saw Jeff Morgan. Okay. Item 2 is voting.
Sorry, Phil. I think Jeff's actually in the room, isn't he?
He is actually. Yeah, I've just noticed.
Yeah, I thought I'd seen it.
Yep,
Here he is.
He's unapologised.
How are you?
I am here, Phil. I wouldn't miss you.
I thought I'd seen you pop up. I thought you'd seen your name pop up.
Yeah, I should be quiet from now on. I promise.
There's always a first time.
Oh, yeah.
Right, item 2 is voting on actions from the last meeting. Are we happy with that representation of the meeting? Any dissent? Yes. I don't think there are any outstanding actions that have got to be dealt with today. Okay. So we'll get on to the main business of the meeting, item 3, which is the schools funding block 2022-23. So who's leading the report?
Me, Phil, I think it's me.
Right.
Hi.
Yeah.
So hi everybody. So basically I'm asking 2 questions for 2 recommendations from the schools forum today, and that's one, a transfer of the 0.5 from the schools block to the high needs block, and second one is an additional sort of lump sum factor applied to the lump sum for schools, and this is to meet the requirement within the written statement of action around uptake of staff training from schools in relation to children and young people with special educational needs. So we've consulted with schools and the results have come back in terms of the school block, and if we look on page 4, it is basically 72% of schools have said, consulted with, have said yes to the transfer of 0.5. In terms of the question around an additional lump sum factor being applied to schools, 64% of schools have agreed that the lump sum factor could be applied. So in terms of the lump sum factor, that will be given to schools. It'll go straight out to schools, and basically what we will be doing from there is for allow schools to backfill staff to come for training from the local authority in terms of children and young people with special educational needs. In addition, we will be looking to give each consortia an additional £5,000 to be able to fund training and work along peer-to-peer support with one of the projects we're running in terms of the Send Inclusion Change programme. But each of the money signed will meet the written statement of action as outlined in Ofsted CQC report. So yes, basically I'm asking just to clarify again, 0.5 transfer from the schools block to the higher needs block and a lump sum factor to be applied for schools. I think the last one.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions, please.
Yes. Firstly, the response rate to the questionnaire, I know response rates are low, but it was about 15%, which in a way is not very encouraging given the significance and importance of these recommendations, and that does actually concern me. There are also issues about what the people rejecting the proposals, and perhaps I'll pause on that point first before I move on to one or two others.
Yeah, I mean, we went out in line with the sort of guidance around consultation with schools, you know, and we went out in enough time for all schools to contribute. It is unfortunate the sort of the low uptake rate, and I think maybe for next year we need to do sort of more publicising through our consortia heads to make sure our head teachers are aware of how important this is. But nevertheless, I mean, in terms, I can only report in terms of what we have received as a council.
Appreciate that. But it isn't very
Dwayne,
encouraging from the significance of the decision. That's what I'm really trying to say.
I share that concern, Martin. It's a point I was going to raise. Dwayne, I'm sure you probably don't want to tell us which schools responded and which ones didn't. But if I contacted you directly about the 3 schools that I'm linked with, I'd be interested to know if they had responded, so I could actually do a bit of exploration as to why they hadn't, if they haven't.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have. Yeah, absolutely happy to have the discussion outside of the schools forum. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Martin, do you want to finish off what you were saying? I've got some other people who want to speak. Do you want to finish off your points you were making?
Well, the other point I was going to make, I mean, having been on the forum for some years, and we've had this issue coming on every year, I think, for quite a few years back. And last year I did vote in favour of the transfer of the money. I mean, I've looked with some care at the negative comments from schools, and one of the things that really worries me is that, in a sense, what's happening is that we are, perhaps unconsciously, helping the government in not, or department in government in not facing up to the fundamental issue of the underfunding of this sector. And if we, transfer money to try and keep the deficit under some control year on year, is the department and the ministers behind them really facing up centrally to this big issue? Sorry, that's it.
I mean, I can come in there. What I can say from a county council perspective, we continue to lobby government for more money. We know this is a national issue. In terms of the Send Change programme this year, we've worked tirelessly to sort of make sure that every penny we spend has been valued for money. And we will continue again as part of the F40 group to lobby government. So it's something that we are actively doing as a council.
Yeah, well, perhaps to answer that, or partly to answer that, I mean, obviously many schools are facing a deficit situation worse than last year, and therefore obviously many of them are concerned about anything which would reduce funds coming directly to them. I mean, this again has been an issue over several years, but it seems to me that in a sense, we made a gesture which in many ways was to support you doing all the work you were doing last year by agreeing or recommending the transfer last year. But now we are sort of back in the same situation, really, with it not being wholly clear or not clear at all that national government is acting.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Send sort of agenda, I know, they've pulled a steering group together now in terms of looking at Send and the agenda and the green paper that's due to come out, which I think is going to come out sort of next year, early next year, and align with the schools white paper on schools. So, it is something that government are taking up. I'm just working within the tools I have in Warwickshire at the moment, and I can say that, without the Send Change programme, and we would not be in the sort of financial position we are now. We are in a better position this year than we were last year.
Yeah.
Okay, Brian,
Phil,
did you want to say something?
Yeah, can I just mention that the government have actually put additional funds in for 22-23, so that has been factored into all this. So there's considerable increase in 2022-23 that we factored in, something like an 8% on the historic factors. We currently don't know what it's going to be going forward, and across all local authorities, we've talked to them, and some authorities are more optimistic. We're probably going on the side of less pessimistic, but we want to be prudent, because we want to get this to be in a proper stable position. So we factored in a lower growth rate that some authorities have. Some authorities have put no growth rate in at all, so they've gone for even worse case scenario. So that's what the position is from where we've worked all the figures out going forward as well. Can also sorry Phil, can also mention that this is Martin talked about the helping the government out with their issue. this is only one-off money. You must remember that
Yeah.
it is still an ongoing problem. So we're not bailing out the government totally, if you get what I mean, and we're not bailing them out for the whole lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we recognise schools' concerns, don't we, about the pressure on their budgets, which are going to be quite intense this year, with additional factors coming across in terms of pay increases and energy costs, etc. So I think we acknowledge that. Right, I'm going to move on then to Jane Burrows, please.
Hi, thanks very much. I've got just a kind of a slight caveat on the vote that we're being asked to do with regards to the transfer of the 0.5% of the school block funding to high needs. I mean, that's obviously subject to sufficient funding to meet the hard funding formula. I think the numbers show that we do have that funding, but I just want to make sure that it is clear it is subject to the hard funding formula being adopted, just in case there were suddenly any shocks in the system. Because the two separate votes showed quite different opinions.
Mm. I mean, we have met the hard funding formula, Jane. I mean, when we look at the sort of papers when we went out, we have met it. I think, you know, in terms of asking for the 0.5, I'm coming in asking for the 0.5. If you look at the sort of papers that went out, it was to move 0.5 and agree, or it was to move 0.5 if the funds are available within the reserves within the sort of block, not to affect the national funding formula, the hard formula. So, I mean, in terms of me coming here today, I have to ask straight away for the 0.5, because if it goes through today, that means I don't have to go to the Secretary of State. So it's all according to this, you know, in page 3 and 4, it's all according how you vote as a school forum.
Yeah.
Yeah, so confirmation the hard funding formula will be met.
Okay, so we have met the funding formula. So there's two. So if I make this clearer, if you look at question 3.5 and 3.6, we have gone out and said, do you agree with moving 0.5, which is obviously yes or no, and 70 odd have said yes on condition that there is reserves there to pay for it. So that does not then affect the hard funding formula. If there aren't any reserves there and we agree to move the 0.5, then it could affect the funding formula if we go ahead and do that. So I think it might sound a bit confusing, but I have to ask initially, can we move the next 0.5, and you can put a caveat in terms of saying,
I'm suggesting we have a caveat because obviously the two separate votes came out quite differently. So it is subject to the hard funding formula being adopted, and I just want to make that very clear.
Okay,
that's my view.
Okay, just extending from what Jane said there, could you just expand on 2.3 on page 2, which is the impact of the free school meals potential?
Yeah, Brian, do you want to come in around the free school meals impact? So we've seen a growth. So because the way we funded, we would have to, we've held money back. So if the free school meals because of COVID have gone up, then we have the money to fund that without touching the hard funding formula. So in terms of that money, it's there. But if the free school meals don't rise and we don't have to pay for them, then that money is there, if that makes sense.
Okay, but so there's a slight risk factor there then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, okay, all right, so I understand that. Yeah, thank you. Faye Padfield, please.
Sorry, hi. It was just to say, obviously, we did agree to move the 0.5 last year. What impact has that had over and above the DSG recovery plan in terms of any difference it's made?
Yeah, I mean, Brian, I don't know if you want to come on this one because you know the budget we presented last time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that funding comes in and adds to the funding we've got for the existing high needs block. So that has helped to close the gap, along with all the initiatives that Dwayne's put through, and are progressing very well and progressing, increasing their effectiveness throughout this year. We will be bringing a report to you. I'm not sure which next school forum on the third quarter roughly the third quarter position, but we're optimistic that it's going to show a better position even more. So we are closing the gap between the expenditure and the funding we have, and that funding does include the high needs block in its totality, plus the contribution in 21-22 from the schools block. So it hasn't been put to anything specific, it's been just put into the funding pool.
Yeah, I guess is it just servicing the debt, as Martin said earlier, that deficit has grown over a number of years, and is it masking the issue by reducing?
Admittedly, it is in a sense masking the issue, but we are being very open about it, and we in all our correspondence and lobbying to government, we say our high needs block of this, but the authority is supporting it by this much money, which the local authority is putting money aside to cover this, plus the element that the schools forum is allowing us to move from the schools block. So it's both, it's almost a collaborative effort between ourselves, yourselves, to meet that deficit overall.
Yeah, I suppose would the money be better on investing, like the suggestion of supporting in the schools block across all areas, so that the high needs block isn't escalating, because needs are not met in mainstream settings. I suppose that's just a pondering consideration, which I think everyone has been thinking whilst answering. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kevin Griffiths, please.
Sorry, yes. I mean, I'm fairly new to the school forum, but for the last 2 years, we've been asked to agree this 0.5%. And I keep hearing it's a one-off, but it doesn't appear to be a one-off. It seems to be a recurring pattern from what I'm hearing. And because we've got such pressure on our schools budgets, and there is, of course, huge pressure on the SEND budgets as well, I fully understand that, but we seem to be robbing Peter to pay Paul, to rob Peter to pay Paul sort of thing. And the more money you're taking away from the mainstream schools, the less they're going to be able to actually cope with the kids with SEND. So you're creating a dilemma here, which I'm struggling to understand.
Dwayne, I think you want to come in on that, don't you?
Yeah.
Go on, Dwayne. You go first.
To be honest with you, and I've been sort of in this role for quite a few years now since the reforms, in terms of Warwickshire has traditionally paid this overspend off over the years, and that has come from council reserves, not from school reserves or from the blocks. I mean, in terms of the blocks, unfortunately, the blocks are ring fenced, so we do need permission to move between blocks, where before, we never had that situation. We could sort out the budgets as and when, and how we needed to make sure the money went into schools. We are in that position where now, the regulations have changed. The council cannot pay off the overspend as it has done in previous years. Last year, when I arrived in Warwickshire last year, was the first year that, and we have to come back every year. It will be every year I'm here at this point in time asking for 0.5 to move across, because that's the only way I can do it, because the council cannot pay this off now. So, it is an issue we are taking up. As I said, we lobbying, but it is an issue that we've got, that the budget for the high needs is insufficient to meet the demands on it. Brian, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, I mean, like the paper suggested about following the high needs funding formula. So we are following the high needs funding formula, and if we're actually in a position where the government finally decides to go down the route of making every local authority in the high needs funding formula, then that's what would happen. That money would still be spared within the block, and wouldn't be given to schools. So you're not in a worse or better position because of that, because all we're doing is utilising that to go to help fund what is a system-wide issue.
Okay, thank you. Sybil Hanson, please.
Thank you. I'd have asked many of the questions that have gone before, but one extra thing struck me when I was reading the survey, and that was quite a few people seemed to vote no because they wanted the opportunity for comment, and they didn't. Therefore, it would suggest that that was the only way they could get their voice heard. Any comment on that?
Sybil, I'm so sorry, but I lost you when you were speaking. I think at a critical point. Would you like to say that again? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. When I was looking and analysing the no and looking at the reasons, quite a few people appeared to say no because it was the only way they could actually make a response. And it gets recorded as no. Yes, and they couldn't comment. And I just wondered whether that has distorted the statistically poor response anyway.
I can't answer that, Sybil, but it's certainly when we, I can sort of speak to my colleague that sent the consultation out. But I think, last year it was a poor response within Warwickshire last year as well. I don't think it's just this year. And I think something that, as I do governors training, I will need to put out to governors as well, how important it is that schools get involved in this consultation. But I couldn't answer that question because I don't know whether I skewed the data.
No, because it's things like, I have clicked no so that I can comment. And that doesn't seem a good way of statistically recording and advising school forum and analysing yeses and nos. And it wasn't the only one that said that. So if you could take it back to look, thank you.
Fair point.
Okay, thank you. Larry Granelli, please. Larry, you're on mute still, I think.
I think one of my questions was the contribution from the Warwickshire County Council. I understood what Dwayne said, they couldn't pay off the overspend, but does that stop them putting extra money in before we overspend?
Well, yeah, Larry, we have to hold the money in reserves because we can't, so we have to save that money to hold that budget up, even though it's overspent. This budget has been overspent now for 7 years. Yeah, so it's not a new thing. It's just that prior to last year, the council could pay it off. There's no other way we can the high needs come with strict funding regulations around them. And as I said, that is ring fenced. That budget is actually ring fenced, so you can only use it for certain things. So there's not something that the council can pay off. In saying that, the council has invested significantly its own money into the Warwickshire Academy and has bought the school there. So, we are invested in different things, but we can't invest in the high needs block, unfortunately. Brian?
Ryan, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, this is Larry. This is all sort of tied up between some quite legal issues within the DSG and what local authorities can and cannot pay for. For example, in theory, local authority cannot directly fund any DSG services, but we are legally obliged by our auditors that if we have a deficit at the end of the year on any of those high needs blocks, that we have to cover it as a local authority, and we do that through the reserve that local authority is putting funding in. And we're talking we're building it up, and in the current MTFS, it's going to in effect come to a few tens of millions that the local authority is putting in. On top of that, local authority is also funded in totality Dwayne's Sending Inclusion Change Programme, as well as the pairs you mentioned. So, we're not saying that the county council is doing this all, he's doing it all by himself, and therefore we're asking schools to contribute by their decision to move money from the schools block to the high needs block. Okay.
Okay, but just another point. I think somebody raised the work that Dwayne, you were doing with your task forces and teams on the ground. So the extra 0.5% won't have any effect on that. Absolutely. Those programs will still go ahead irrespectively.
Absolutely, and you know, as Brian said, we will be bringing a report in, and it is making a difference, Larry. You know, certainly, you know, the trajectory, all the data is telling me that we are going in the right direction. And I've been honest, since I've arrived at Warwickshire, I can narrow the gap. I can't close it. Yeah, because there isn't enough money in the system. So, you know, I'm making sure that every penny I spend and every decision is made is, you know, is as robust as it can be. But ultimately, you know, I can't ever see me in my time at Warwickshire, you know, absolutely closing the gap in the funding, because there isn't enough money in the system to cover the demand on the services. Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate, and I sympathise with both arguments here. Yeah. I'm just trying to come to a position where I think I'm doing the right thing, and I think somebody brought it up again earlier that, you know, we've done this. I've been on and off the forum, and I've been doing this for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, I guess. But I think a point I'd just like to put forward is maybe it's time for a slight change for a period of time, that we maybe make a different decision this year and see the effects that your work's having, and that might encourage our schools to be more responsive to the surveys and change their opinions. And I'm not being negative here on what they're getting, what the money's being spent on. So, I mean, at the moment, I'm not sure which way I'm going to go, but because it's so bad, and you've got COVID on top of that in schools, which is stretched. Like, I've just come out of a finance meeting this morning, and I don't know where we're going to go. So I think that's influencing me. When I can see the results of the work you are doing, and I'm sure you are doing good work, I might have a different opinion this time next year.
Can I just add a bit of perspective on the effect of this? Is Dwayne not to go red in the face and I had to explode. Before Dwayne started, we had a projection, 10-year projection of the high needs block deficit, and it was into over 100 million on overall deficit by 10 years time. That's come down by at least half. I haven't got the exact figures in front of me, but that's the effect that all the work that Dwayne's been doing chips away every year progressively. So if we make $500,000 saving in 1 year, you get 10 years worth of saving. That's five million over that 10-year period, and that's what the work that Dwayne has been doing over her 7 projects that we've got there, but also the 31 or 32 now, I think it is, that underpin all the other projects and all the other work. So that's the effect it's had, being able to keep Dwayne here, keep the service together. It has helped.
Yeah. Can I just say, Larry, in terms of when I joined you last year, the growth in the service was at 14%. Yeah. And that was significant. It was significant for schools. It was significant for the budget. In 12 months, that growth is down to 6% now. Okay, and that's just one part of the journey. In terms of decision making, the decision making is robust. You know, we had 9 panels, we're now down to 2, and decisions are being made, weekly. I want to get money into schools, and you sit on that project, the top of funding, because actually if we get the right support in at the right time, the money will go directly back to the schools, but directly back to the children. And that's important for me. So I think, if I show you some of the figures when we come next time, I know in terms of what I predicted in the first week I was here, I was like, guys, it's really bad. We're going to be 100 million overspent by 2027. And I think, as Brian said, we're down to about 50 million now. So, it has had its impact, probably a bit lower.
No, I appreciate that. And I know it's a very difficult job. I'm just expressing my personal view and situation. And And I'm hoping that the work you are doing could have an effect on the response we get, because if people start to see extra value coming in, they might be less ready to criticise the situation and oppose some of these actions. And I don't know how you're going to cope with it, to be honest, but you know, as chairs of governors and academies, and we're balancing all those balls the same as you are. So okay, thank you very much anyway.
Thanks for that, Larry. I think it's a pointer for Dwayne when she does her update on her Send Inclusion Change programme. We can actually target that and actually address the point you made is that, you know, hopefully we can get a real clear picture across to people, so they will continue in the collaboration and support for us. Thanks.
Yeah.
Matthew Bound, please.
Hi, I just wanted to go back a bit to the comments that we've looked at to help form the judgment, and I just wanted to give you a kind of my views as a head teacher and as a head teacher of a school that does have a high number of SEN children. In my experience, when I've spoken, because I've been on the forum now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and I do see it's a regular issue, and I understand all those points, and yeah, I have a dilemma with whether the funding is best used in that way or not. However, the thing that I think I want to share, really, just to go back to those points, is that I speak to lots of schools, and what I find interesting is when we talk about this point and the best use of the money, is those schools that have real experience with particularly high levels of SEND children and are very inclusive, they're very positive about moving this money over. Those schools, and I'm not saying it's a very sweeping statement, but I'm just going to say it as it is. Those schools that may have very little SEND or not necessarily going to benefit directly from this move are not keen at all on this money getting moved across. And so from my point of view, I'm not trying to advocate anyone to make any decision, but I'm saying you need to be a little careful of those comments, because we don't know what schools they're coming from. We don't know what their level of SEND is. We don't know if those positive comments are from schools that have got a high level of SEND. We don't know if the less positive ones are from schools that aren't really going to benefit from it. But I think the whole future of, well, nationally, but particularly of Warwickshire, is we're really trying to encourage schools to be more inclusive, and we need the local authority to do everything they can to support schools to be inclusive. This, for me, and I know it's not going to solve the problem, but this movement of money, if that means that it can sustain or keep the same level of training and support that we've got at the moment, then that helps to encourage those schools to be inclusive that need to. And those schools that already are inclusive, it will continue. Yeah, it's not enough support. We know it's not enough support. The local authority know it's not, but it still gives us that support. I do worry that if we don't use the money in this way, we're taking a bit of a back step, and those schools that are inclusive carry on being that, and those that aren't so inclusive are less inclined to be. But I say I'm just a bit sceptical about some of the comments and how we should use them to form our judgment. That's what I wanted to share, really.
All right, Jane, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to come back in?
Yes, I do. I've got a question. It's not so much on the 0.5%, it's on the lump sum factor, if there's some additional school funding. And apologies if this was discussed at the last meeting, but I have to send my apologies to that. It just feels a bit of a blunt instrument looking at distributing any additional funding by way of the lump sum factor. And what I mean by that is, obviously, we have very, very small primary schools on one end of the scale and very large secondary schools on the other end of the scale. And yet we're expecting the same kind of commitment from all of those schools around training and sending staff for training for SEND, but the requirements will be quite different. So I'm just wondering if any other factors had been considered, because it's a real blunt instrument. It doesn't take any consideration the size of the actual institution itself.
Yeah, Jane, I think to answer that, I mean, we've had an Ofsted inspection, as you know, a local area Ofsted inspection that picked up 5 significant area weaknesses, 2 in particular related directly to schools. One, there were too many of our children in special needs schools when they should have had their needs met in mainstream schools. And the second point was, because we have placed too many children into special needs schools, we now have a workforce that do not have the skills, knowledge or expertise to meet our children's needs within local mainstream schools. Now, for me, that is obviously, I mean, through the Send Change programme, I had a workforce development programme going to make sure I had the right skills, knowledge and understanding within my own workforce, but also to make sure that the schools had the right skills, knowledge and understanding. Now, what we want to be able to do with our lump sum is not to give it directly to schools and say, here it is, and you know, disproportionate, but is to allow schools that we know through the Send Change programme and through the Ofsted written statement of action, the opportunity to take up training and not be disadvantaged for taking up that training. It'll be some core training across all schools. We will be doing the audits. You know, the council are paying for all that audit work because that's through the Send Change programme. But this is really to go to the consortia heads. I want to give a lump sum of money to the consortia heads so they can go across all the consortias, and then individual schools to allow, so you'll go straight back into school. So if we got 5 training days, every school will have an opportunity to attend them 5 training days, because I can't physically make schools take up the training, but if we cover the back cost of supply costs for staff, then it's not going to disadvantage any school in having that free training, which I will be providing. So it's not something that
I'm not arguing. Sorry, I'm not arguing or debating the purpose of the money and the commitment from the schools. I'm saying that larger schools will have a larger training requirement and will have a larger supply cost or cover cost to send more staff to such training. My question is, why are we using the lump sum as a factor to distribute more funding to schools, and were other factors not considered, like per pupil funding, for example? But I can't remember. I think there might have been a discussion about it, but I'm not sure if there was. And I know Neil Butler is not at the meeting today, so.
Can I just add in that, Jane? Yeah, I wasn't involved in discussion on this, but we and unfortunately Neil's not here today. Who did look at this, and this was considered the only real way we could distribute the money, from what I've heard. Any other way would be very problematic. And it's a blunt instrument, but it is a simple instrument, and it gets it directly to where Dwayne needs it to go to get the action quickly. So that's all I can really add for the moment, I'm afraid.
It might be worth as a follow-up from this. I mean, hopefully it won't affect the vote, but I would be interested to know the rationale behind that, if that could be, because if other members of the Schools Forum can't remember, then it's worth just looking at again, because it is a blunt instrument. I'm not sure why we didn't look at pupil funding. Thanks.
Jane, are you happy to vote on that second, when we come to it, are you happy to vote on that second recommendation without getting that full answer?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I might have to abstain from it.
All right, okay.
Thank you. But thanks for checking.
All right, Faye Padfield, please.
Hi, yeah, just wanted to, and Dwayne's mentioned it, that we did have an Ofsted recently, and to draw it back to, it's not all about the money, it's about the outcomes for the children, and that's not just in terms of achievement, but their actual experience within the education settings that they're in. In that report, many children reported that they had very poor support in mainstream schools and they were really unhappy. So I guess it's a question that I ask virtually every time in the why the change in the conversation trial is consistently delayed, and the idea of changing some of these systemic attitudes within you know, bigger issues, not even just SEND, but things that are affecting all children. There's a huge rise from the DfE attitude towards increased behaviourism in schools, very rigid expectations of children being in a particular way, which is hostile to a lot of children with SEND. And while you're sort of dealing with that, how are we going to change the conversation?
Can I come in on that, Faye? Because we are starting a trial in the next couple of weeks, which is directly that inclusion with 20 schools in the rugby area. And that is about supporting our schools and through my services, how we can go in and support schools through early intervention and make sure that we do have that support wrapped around them clusters and around the schools. Because for me, when I joined here, that was quite evident, is that nobody goes into head teaching not to want to teach children. But one thing that was quite evident to me is that staff were saying to me they did not feel they had the skills to be able to do it. So, we are starting a big trial in the next couple of weeks.
I understand that, but I'm talking, I suppose, more fundamentally. While schools have systems in place which reward being quiet and not forgetting anything ever, or else you'll get a behaviour point and they add up to detentions and things like that, things which are naturally more difficult for children with SEND. And as we know, diagnosis and assessments and things are all very, very difficult to come by. Are we trying to fight something that actually is a much bigger issue? There seems to be less focus on nurture and understanding and developing children in that regard, and a lot more of these are the rules, follow them or else.
I mean, Faye, well, like I say, is I've been in Warwickshire now 18 months and I've seen some really, really good practice. On the opposite, I've seen some really weak practice. Hopefully by giving people the skills that they inclusion is a state of mind. If the head's inclusive and the governing body's inclusive, then you'll have an inclusive school. So for me, it's about taking every head on that journey with us, because a child thrives best within the local school, in the local community, and that's important, I think, for any family of and parent of a child with special needs.
It's very difficult though when you're talking secondary academies where there isn't quite the influence that there is with primary maintained schools, and the approaches are very different.
I just to let you know, in terms of academies, I meet monthly with the regional schools commissioners, and they are working with me around inclusion and what that means for our academies as well. So they're very much joining, the approach in Warwickshire, and are supporting me wholeheartedly. So I hear what you say, but from that perspective, they are involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nikki Burton, please.
Hi everyone, just a couple of reflections to share really. So first one is I sit on one of the task groups at the moment, which is for the top up for the HCPs, and we've had a couple of days, Friday and Monday, really quite intense days, and Monday's day was all about the budgeting, and we kept ring fencing the discussions around how do we get more of that funding into mainstream schools. Obviously looking at our special school colleagues as well, and to see how we maintain the funding that they absolutely need. And then our early years, which is myself representing maintain nursery schools, how do we get that early intervention in quicker? And in looking at the new matrix and the budget, we really, that question kept coming in, what can we do and how can we make such a change that we can get that funding in? And I think it's a bit really what Matt has talked on about, how can we get it across all those schools that absolutely need it, but how can we then as a whole county have the same ethos and principles about our SEND and our training that's going into all our schools, our settings, and this is from 0 up to 25, our post 25. So there was a lot of emphasis on having the funding spent in schools that will make a difference. And then my other reflection on my head is obviously looking at the breakdown of 36 schools. It is really sad that we only have 36 schools that have fed back, because it's such an important issue, and it's really hard to, again, what Matt said, to calculate what those comments mean when you haven't got a broad view. Obviously, the smaller schools at the moment are shouting out and saying deficits are coming, and we know COVID has hit all our budgets. I guess what's the LA take on that for those schools that are struggling? Have they got sustainability action groups in place? Is that happening for those settings? I guess would be my question for Schools Forum.
I mean, in terms of answering that, Nick, yeah, that's not my sort of role in terms of sort of small school strategy. That sits with my other colleague. But I certainly know any council would be looking at schools in financial difficulty. That's something that's very much part of our programme. So yeah, I mean, you know, and Brian's nodding, I can see, yeah. But it doesn't sit. It doesn't. That's one budget that doesn't sit with me. I got the other one.
And I guess the other question for us to ask from Schools Forum is, if the majority did vote no today, for instance, what's the next steps then? What would that mean? Can you explain that process through for us so we have that understanding clearly?
Well, it'll just put more debt on, in short. Yeah, so you'll have money, you'll be underspent in one budget and overspent in another. And the only way that we could remove, that's what I'm saying, the only way I can actually take from the schools block into the high needs is to ask for 0.5 disapplication. Yeah. And again, I can, you know, go to the Secretary of State, but I wouldn't need to go to the Secretary of State if we agreed here today. But if we don't, then it'll just go on overspent. We'll have a bigger deficit.
Thank you.
Brian.
You're on mute. Oh, you're on mute.
Brian.
18 months, you think I'd get used to it. No, I mean, I don't want to put any frighteners on anyone, but one of the issues is that the local authority is covering this debt, large chunks of millions of pounds. It's putting in each year out of its budget at the moment to cover this. It's also funding Dwayne's change programme, which is affecting the whole thing. You know, there might be a risk if we don't get this money, in that they have to cut back on the money that Dwayne gets for the Sending Inclusion Change Programme. I'm not saying it will happen, but there is the risk there. Okay, because they're having to look back at all that sort of spending on one-off project work, improvement, all this stuff which we want to do, and which members and councillors are really eager to develop things, especially post-COVID. But it is a risk, and obviously I can't go into more details about the budget that's going to be discussed in the next few months council-wide, but you know that there is that possibility of a danger, and anyone can tell you that. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, is there anyone else that wishes to ask a question or comment?
Yeah, Phil, I just wanted to go back to my point about the lump sum.
Okay.
I've just gone back to the consultation paper that Neil Butler sent out, and the actual question stated right at the end, if you don't agree with the lump sum factor, what factor would you like to see adjusted? And some of the comments where people have said no for that question within the consultation does mention using per pupil led factors to reflect the different needs for training, and some comments have come back and said they didn't understand what was meant by the question, so they couldn't comment. So I just wanted to flag it to the Schools Forum that there is a little bit of lack of clarity about that, and it doesn't seem to be a reason why lump sum has been chosen versus per pupil factors, other than possibly simplicity like Brian has mentioned. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that point.
I think, you know, both myself and Jane have been on the forum for various times in the past. Whenever you come to distribute any money, there were always different, especially in the past, pre the blocks, and our old formula. There were always discussions and differences of opinion across the board, whether money goes more to. In the past, it was almost on there was geographical arguments, there were small school arguments, there were large school arguments, there were sector different discussions. So you know, like I said, this is blunt, but it is simple, and it is one way. That's all I can say. Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, Larry.
Yeah, sorry. Just thinking about some of the discussions and the answers. I think the only way we're going to see any increase in response to the surveys and commitment, and I support Dwayne 100%, because I come from a school with high SEN pupils, and I think you build a reputation and you get more and more as it goes on. If it was me, I'd be sending the money to the schools that are practicing what Dwayne wants and not sending it to the rest. And that's the quickest way to get a more active response from the schools. And that's the only way you're going to make it work. You know, work it like a business. You know, reward the ones that are doing the right things and don't reward the other ones. So, you know, it's as simple as that to me. And you'll see a quicker response from that than anything. You'll have a lot of ear bashing, but that's what you're there for.
I'm happy to vote on that.
This is Larry's.
You know, it's simple.
Larry's top, this is, isn't it?
Larry, if my job was just that simple, let me tell you now.
Let us make it that simple for you. You put the proposal forward and we'll vote on it.
Carrot and stick, is it, Larry? Yeah. I mean, the thing for me is about, it isn't right that some schools are inclusive and others aren't. It isn't right that a 4-year-old is, refused to go to the local primary school, when the needs are not that significant, and other schools are expected to pick that child up because that head is not inclusive. It's not right. So for me, I think we need to make that right collectively, and if that is, bringing each other to account, then I think that needs to be done, Larry, because it's not fair.
I support you 100%, but I have got a real problem with putting money where it's not going to do what's needed. And putting it across the patch is not going to do that. All you're doing is rewarding the same failure and not supporting the people who are supporting your program.
Well, we could recoup it, Larry. We could put recoupment in if they don't take up the training and they don't show an inclusive model, so the money comes back to the pot.
Well, whatever, I'm just offering an opinion. It's your decision, but I think you'll get a lot more support if, in those sort of ways than we will sitting here talking about it.
Okay, thank you. Michael Moran, please.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I was only. I'm just conscious of the time, and I'm just really listening to everyone's expert opinions. Just worried that we'll almost run out of time. I personally have got a meeting at 3 o'clock. I'm supposed to chair, and I just wanted almost when we were looking to get to the voting.
I think we're about there. I'm going to say now, is everybody ready to move to the recommendations, please? Right. Okay. So first one is recommendation A, the transfer of 0.5% of schools block funding to the high needs block for 2022-2023. All those in favour of that, please show your hands. All right, somebody counting those?
Yes, I'm just marking those.
Okay, we've got a count.
13 in favour.
Right.
That's my rough count as well, yeah.
Okay. All right, if you'd like to take your hands down, please. Can I ask for those again, please, to indicate? I'll make that 5. Is that right?
Sorry, I may have put my hand up accidentally then. What was that one vote for?
This is voting against proposal A.
Yeah, sorry, my hand was down for that. My mistake. Yeah.
Right, so that's 2 then, I believe, yeah?
Yep.
Right, so recommendation A is carried. So recommendation B is allocating the additional schools block through the lump sum factor in 2022-23 to encourage schools to use the funding to support training. So all those in favour of that, please show. Okay, has everyone voted who wishes to vote? We've got a count on that.
10.
Okay.
10, yeah.
All right, take your hands down, please. And all those against. About 5.
5, yeah.
Yep.
All right, so that proposal is also carried.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead
you.
and carry on, Dwayne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone very much for your time today. Please note that our next meeting will be on Thursday, the 13th of January, also online. And I'd like to take this opportunity to wish everyone the best for Christmas and the New Year, if that's not too early, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.